Okay, welcome to this presentation, this workshop. The title is, as you can see, Hooked, and the objective is to look at some ways to increase the engagement of our students, our learners, in the language classroom. I want you to imagine a situation. Here you are. This is you in your role of teacher. Let's imagine that you are in a classroom with a classroom full of students, maybe 40, maybe 30, maybe 20, but you are faced with a course book which somehow you have to use during the course of your lesson. You face a problem, an uphill struggle. Now, you may or may not be able to relate to this, but typically among your students, you are likely to hear complaints along these lines. The material in the course book is boring, it's out of date, it's irrelevant to the lives of your students, it's repetitive in some sense. It's predictable as a result, perhaps, of being repetitive. And the consequence is that your students are tired of learning using this material. So, we're going to do something about it, and we're going to use this guy to help us. It is, of course, Captain Hook. Now, Captain Hook's one distinguishing feature is, of course, his hook, which, as you can imagine, explains the title of the session. The idea is that students who are engaged with what is happening in the classroom, in other words, hooked into the classroom activities and the lesson content, will be alert, attentive, motivated, open minded, and therefore more likely to remember what they are learning. Most importantly, I believe, the engagement, the process of being hooked into the lesson content happens at a subconscious level. So it's not something that students themselves can consciously control. This makes it a very powerful weapon for teachers to have, because it means that if teachers follow the rules of engagement in the classroom, their students are going to be hooked into what they are doing, whether they want to be or not. As you can imagine, this is particularly important to remember when it comes to teaching moody and fickle teenagers. So, the aim of the workshop is therefore to demonstrate some simple ways to increase learner engagement in our classrooms, and in particular the level of engagement with text. Maybe written text, but it may also be spoken text, in other words, transcripts which accompany listening activities. The material that you're going to see in this workshop is taken incidentally from the Kaplan K Plus Notes teaching booklets. First of all, we're going to look at some pre-reading or pre-listening activities. In many ways, the secret to the success of a reading or listening activity lies in how hooked into the text the students are from the beginning. This hooking in process may come through the topic itself, but more importantly, I believe for teachers, it may come also from the tasks with which students are presented. So, a simple task to begin with, a dictation activity in which the teacher dictates letters, spelling out the title or the heading of the text that you are going to later present to the students. Very simple way, on the one hand, to revise and practice the letters of the alphabet, of course, but also it has the fun element of decoding, that is, deciding where the boundaries of the words appear. So these would be a group of letters that I would take to students, and then, of course, give students the task of decoding, in other words, identifying the headline, which in this case is here. Similar idea is to take the complete headline, the title, separate into separate blocks, much like the blocks that you can see here, and present students with the blocks rather than doing a dictation. Present the blocks but mixed up, like so. Give some help if necessary. You might tell students that this is number one, give them a little bit of thinking time, reveal that this is number two, and so on as appropriate for the students. There is the solution. If you want to keep it simple, of course, just take the words themselves from the headline and jumble them up, mix them up. Okay, here's another possible headline. In this case, the headline is "The Great Brown Gold Global Takeover." I think worth considering at this point the role of prediction as an activity. I think there are two reasons why prediction activities are used in classrooms prior to reading or listening to text. One of these reasons is to increase the level of interest in the topic. This is what teacher training courses often call activating schemata, that is, background knowledge of the topic. The other reason is to activate the relevant language which is stored in the brains of the students. The primings is one term that's often used in this context. The primings, or the set of primings relevant to a topic. By activating these primings, we can provide our students with a way to unlock the meaning of the text, to give them access to the meaning of the text. A simple example I can give you of this, imagine you were to read an article entitled 30 Years of EastEnders. Now, if you're familiar with British television, you're very likely to know that EastEnders is a very popular long-running BBC television soap opera. So if you read the title 30 Years of EastEnders, what will happen at this point is that you will activate a set of linguistic primings in your head associated with, among other things, television soap operas, television TV series. If you then read the text or listen to the text and find the word soap, your brain will assume that the word soap in this context refers to the meaning of soap as in a soap opera, and not the meaning of soap associated with washing, for example. This activity, this process of activating the primings associated with one of the meanings of the word soap, significantly speeds up the processing of the text. And in my opinion, this is one of the very powerful reasons for having a title or a headline preceding a text in any context, a newspaper headline, for instance. Headlines very useful. You may, of course, ask what happens if the text in the course book or the text that accompanies the listening activity does not have a title. Well, why not invent one? It takes 10 seconds to invent a suitable, relevant and appropriate title with which you can then work. Here's an example then. The Great Brown Gold Global Takeover. We're going to do a little prediction activity called interviewing the headline. Students are asked to imagine that they are reporters or journalists. Instead of interviewing a person, a famous person, a celebrity, someone in the news, instead of this, they're going to interview the headline or the title of the text itself. In order to do this, of course, they need questions. So give the students time to prepare 5 or 6 relevant questions. When they come to read the text later, they will automatically be much more engaged in looking to see if their questions are answered in the text. This is a far more authentic task than actually supplying them with pre-written comprehension questions. Notice, of course, it doesn't matter if the answers to their questions don't actually appear in the text itself. The important point is that by looking for the answers or listening for the answers, the students will be engaged in the content far more. Some examples that might be used, of course, you could give students 1 or 2 examples if necessary. It depends on the levels of imagination and creativity among your students. Okay. And then, of course, students can prepare the interview, and then when they look at the text, when they read it, when they listen to it, they're effectively interviewing it as part of the comprehension process. Alternatively, you might give students keywords or key phrases from the text, take out these keywords, these key phrases, present them to students and ask students to predict the content of the text, the content in terms of meaning, the key concepts, the key ideas. You could also include the heading or the title in this activity. In this case, the title is the second title that I presented with you, The Battle of the Lifestyles. Ask students to predict what ideas, what points of view, what viewpoint might be expressed in the text. And then, of course, later they'll be much more engaged in reading the text or listening to the text in order to check if their predictions were correct. Okay. An alternative is to do the opposite. In other words, to take away the keywords or phrases and provide the skeleton form of the text. That's what I've done here with one paragraph from one of the texts that we're going to look at shortly. You have the basic skeleton with the keywords, phrases removed. Students can then be given the task of guessing what the content that I've removed may be. We've become to what. Stress that it could be one word or it could be a phrase. Whoops. Let's remove that. Stress also that it's not a question of being correct or incorrect. There are lots of possibilities here. And I think it's important to make sure that students are encouraged to guess without any fear of being incorrect. Notice also that there are clues embedded in the text. We have a plural verb here, which suggests that this must be a plural noun phrase. I think encouraging students to be language detectives by looking for clues in text is a very motivating and engaging way to encourage students to interact and engage with texts. Okay, so that's the end of part 1. We will continue with part 2 immediately after this.